So I'm excited to introduce Dr. Paul Clayton to you. Dr. Paul, I'd like to welcome you here on the call. Dr. Paul.
Thank you, Carla. Good to be here, and I'm amazed to see so many people from so many parts of the world.
Dr. Paul, just to let people know a little bit about you. I know you have so many things that you've been doing. What are some of the things that you're maybe most proud of that you've been working with before we get started?
Well, actually, one of the things that I'm proudest of in the last few years is I was involved in designing and building a very complex office space.
I've been there.
In a small town in one of the southern United States in North America. And it was a suite of 10 offices and a reception area and a meeting room. And it looks like nothing else you've ever seen. And everybody's really happy with it. I had a lot of fun doing it. So yes, I'm steeped in nutrition and health and the science that surrounds that, but I have many other interests as well.
We love that about you, Dr. Paul. So, Dr. Paul, you have spent years studying health. And not only that, I mean, you look good for your age, so we know that it does work anti-aging wise. But when people are trying to do the best they can to get the best bodies working the best, you know, nowadays, I think it's confusing for so many people. But you're making this quite simple, but the science behind it is maybe more complex. So if you were to talk to somebody, whether it's an athlete or a neighbor of yours, and you would to say, this is what you can do to make sure your body is going to be working the best, what would you try to explain to them?
I would start off by talking about a really good scientist called Barry Popkin. And for any of you who have delved into this area, you might know his name. He published papers in around about the year 2000, 2001, 2002, and he coined a phrase called the nutrition transition, which just sounds like jargon. I mean, there's so much jargon in science, but what he was describing was the process that we've seen in many countries where people have left traditional eating habits, traditional nutritional habits behind. And they've moved into the modern age, which means they're consuming much more processed and many more ultra-processed foods. And everywhere that this has happened, the damage to public health has been absolutely incalculable. So heart disease, cancer, dementia, allergies, all of these things have spiraled. And there are still a couple of places in the world, isolated, out-of-the-way places, where people live very traditional lifestyles and eat traditional kinds of foods, unprocessed foods that they grow and cook for themselves. And they don't have our health problems. They don't age in the way that we do. They don't get sicker as they get older, which is what we think of as normal. So what I would do, I guess, I'd say to my neighbor, well, there was this guy, Barry Popkin, and he explained that we have created a diet and lifestyle that is really harmful. And what we should do, we should try and get back to that older way, a more traditional way of eating. But the problem is that although Barry really was right, he hit the nail on the head. And we've seen this transition happening in so many countries now. And right now it's happening in China and in India big time. And they have huge public health problems as a result of that. You end up with this idea, well, the modern lifestyle, the modern diet is not very good for us. It's harming us. And as I said, it's very obviously harming us in many, many ways. But that doesn't help because it's a kind of mythological idea. It's a romantic idea. Yeah, modern world is terrible. It's hurting us. It's damaging us. But it's so vague that it doesn't allow us to propose rational and strategic alternatives or remedies. And so what I've been doing, and Carl was right, I have been studying this for years. I'm just, your typical obsessive scientist. And I've been studying this for more than 50 years now, more than half a century. And what's become very apparent to me and to many of my colleagues is the way in which the modern diet and lifestyle harm us. Well, we've got to the point where we know exactly how it harms us. And once you know how it harms us, we can propose antidotes. So how does it hurt us? It hurts us by causing chronic inflammatory stress, which I'm sure everybody has heard is a bad idea and is involved in driving many different disease states. But at the same time, it also causes type B malnutrition, it causes dysbiosis, and those three structural elements together are responsible for the overwhelming majority of all the disease that we see at the public health level and increasingly at the level of our families, friends, and our communities. There's one more disease root, and that is because of our low energy lifestyles and because of the huge load of carbohydrates and sugars in our diets. The combination of those two factors creates hyperglycemia, hyperinsulinemia, moving eventually towards insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and a whole set of metabolic imbalances. So now, for the first time, we can say, yep, the modern lifestyle is bad for us. It's clearly killing us in very, very large numbers. This is how it does it. And what I've been able to do with Zinzino is to develop tools that we can use to reverse the first three. So we can stop chronic inflammation really easily. We can stop dysbiosis. We can stop type B malnutrition. And what I've been working on recently is a new nutritional or pharmaco-nutritional tool that we can use to address the fourth major problem area: an inactive lifestyle and too much sugar in your diet. And the way we do this is really interesting. It used to be the case that my colleagues would say, well, you just have to take more exercise and eat less sugar. And that's, a good place to start, but a lot of people can't or won't do that. And we used to think that the only way to switch on the machinery that you need to make those problems go away is via aerobic exercise, by going out and running a marathon or a half marathon, or at the very least a couple of miles every day. And then it was found that there were other ways of achieving the same end result. Now, do you remember when the astronaut program first started, and the first astronauts who went into space for protracted periods of time, when they came back, they were in a terrible state. They had developed osteoporosis, they had becoming diabetic, they had lost muscle mass, they were a mess. Because if you're very, very inactive and in space where there's no gravity, not only can no one hear you scream, you also can't exert any physical activity. And if you don't do that, it's really bad for you. And you may have heard that something called sitting down disease, sitting down for too long at your job or at home, is now known to be as bad for your health as a cigarette habit. So these astronauts were really being harmed by this. When they came down from staying in the space station, they had to be carried away on stretchers because they were no longer capable of walking. That's how badly off they were. And because this was such a problem, the people at NASA decided, well, next time we send someone into space, we'll send them a consignment of springs and rubber bands, and they can work with those kinds of exercises when there's no gravity to at least keep the body moving and to maintain muscular function, because that's so important when it comes to insulin resistance and sensitivity. And then for a while, these astronauts were going up, and the long stay astronauts were spending 3 or 4 hours a day working on stationary bicycles or pulling against springs and and rubber bands, basically, which is a distraction from their work. It takes up a lot of otherwise useful time. And I had been working with some really good scientists in South Korea. They had identified a herb called Gynastemna pentaphyllum, which is the key constituent in a traditional Chinese remedy called jiao gulan. And jiao gulan is a herb that was made into a tisane or tea that was given to people who were elderly and frail or diabetic. And lo and behold, it helped them to control their blood sugar. It improved their muscular strength and stamina. It got them back on their feet, got them moving again. And the Koreans, the scientists who were interested in this said, well, this must be doing something that's very like exercise. And they analyzed what was in the herb. They found it was a saponin, which is a structure a little bit like a steroid molecule, called a dammarane. And then they found that these dammaranes were able to switch on the body's main energy switch, which is called AMP kinase. AMP kinase is the same enzyme that's switched on when you take physical exercise. And when you switch on that enzyme, it does a lot of really good things. For example, it makes you grow more mitochondria in your muscle. The muscle cells on their membranes then express more glucose uptake sites. And so you rediscover insulin sensitivity. This enzyme, when it's switched on, makes you burn deep adipose tissue, that deep, stubborn fat inside the abdomen that is so toxic. This enzyme, when it's switched on, switches off another switching station lower down in the metabolic cascade called mTOR, mammalian targeted rapamycin. And when you do that, you slow down cancer growth and progression. So all the many benefits of exercise, making muscle and ligaments and bones stronger, improving your plasma lipid profile, making you fitter, losing fat, reducing your risk of cancer, they all go through this one enzyme, energy sensor, AMP kinase. You switch on AMP kinase with aerobic exercise, you switch it on through stationary dynamic exercise or isotonic exercise, and the other way to switch it on is by taking these DAMA-rains. It does exactly the same thing. So here we have the equivalent of physical exercise in a capsule. It's exactly what it is.
So Dr. Paul, you've got so many words in there, and some of us that aren't scientists, we hear the things about you reducing the fat and the effects on your body. So this isn't something for just athletes. This is something that everybody can be focusing on if they want to have optimal body function, with heart function, brain function. And you're saying that if you're treating your body right, you're going to have everything you said is going to be reduced, and you're going to be working optimally in all these ways for all of us?
Well, no, this isn't for brain function. This is really for metabolic function, and its main impact is on blood sugar control, muscle strength, bone strength. It has a role to play in cancer prevention or risk reduction, but I don't want to talk about that too much. Let's focus on the other things first. It's ideal for couch potatoes, people or TV channel surfers, or anybody who makes a living by hammering away at a computer keyboard. So for people like us, probably most of us, or anyone who has the misfortune to live in Minnesota, where you're surrounded by snowdrifts that's 20 feet tall and you can't go out to exercise anyway. For people who are living too much of their time indoors, spending too much time sitting on their behinds, this is an alternative to taking physical exercise. It has the same beneficial effects. It's a kind of a shortcut or a hack, if you like. And, some people might say, well, there's something a little bit immoral about this, because here you're getting the game without the pain. And, you could make that case. But I say that this is good for astronauts. It's good for people who have to spend a lot of time sitting down. And it's good for people who can't take physical exercise because they have arthritis or peripheral neuropathy, or maybe they're hemiplegic. For people like that, this is a godsend. This is an absolute godsend. So we now have 4 pharmaco-nutritional tools that we can use to counter the 4 major elements in the modern lifestyle that are killing us. And with these 4 elements, yeah.
And so explain what people, because as you've been working with Zinzino on this, and you said this is what we need to do, what can people be doing that makes it simple for them, so they don't have to know all the science behind it? What is it that they can be doing right now to be, coming in and taking charge of that for their own bodies?
Well, I'm not someone who says the first thing you should do is to take supplements. I mean, the first thing that I would like people to do is to eat a better diet. And the simplest way to do that is to stop eating ultra-processed foods. Go back to eating basic produce. Learn how to cook. That really is the place to start. And for those of you who don't quite know what an ultra-processed food is, if it comes in a package, it has a long shelf life, has more than 6 ingredients, some of which are clearly not foods because they're called things like emulsifiers and stabilizers and acidulants, that's ultra-processed. And when you look at it, if you can't immediately tell what's in it, that's probably going to be ultra-processed too. So stay away from those ultra-processed foods, which is hard because they're cheap, they're everywhere, and boy, do they taste good. because they are designed by the food companies to be as close to being addictive as they can possibly make them. I mean, that's bad for us. That's good for their market. That's all they care about. They don't mind poisoning us because they know they won't be held to account. They're too big and too powerful. And so they're happy to sell this addictive, toxic foods. And that's exactly what they're doing. And the best thing that we can do is just step away from those aisles in the supermarket where the ultra-processed foods are on sale and go to the produce section and learn how to work with basic produce. And that tastes better. And for those of you who already love to cook, I know I don't have to sell you on this. For those of you who don't, learning how to cook for me has been a real pleasure. And it's very empowering when you cook something for the people that you love, people around you, that they enjoy. That's a wonderful thing. It's a gift. And it's a really important social mechanism. That's how we bind ourselves to each other, to our friends and the people who are close to us.
And that's going to be a healthy thing for people too, is that connection.
Yes,
so
absolutely. Absolutely.
The connection is making that difference, and cooking and making sure that what you're putting into your body is healthy. And then you've said exercise. So making sure that people are using their bodies, that's definitely going to do that for them. And what else do they need to do, Dr. Paul?
Well, the rest of it's pretty obvious, Don't smoke, please. I mean, but everyone else tells you exactly the same message. And if you're going to drink, well, don't drink too much, and perhaps make it red wine or maybe a couple of beers rather than, the high octane, the high proof stuff. That's generally a good thing to do. And I know North Americans won't like to hear this, but maybe don't grill and barbecue quite so much. Find other ways of cooking things like meats, which are cooked at lower temperature. Temperature is the key here, because the higher the temperature that you use to cook meats, the more you risk forming what are called cooked meat carcinogens. They're formed in high temperature cooking processes. They have complicated names. One of the best known is PHIP, P-H-I-P, but that actually stands for a chemical term that's probably about 50 letters long. These are not the kinds of compounds you want to be eating on a regular basis. They make cancer cells more aggressive, and they're actually mutagenic, so they create cancer cells in the first place. This is one reason why so many Americans have bowel cancer, for example. And it's also the reason why so many young people are developing bowel cancer. If you look at the trends in cancer epidemiology, bowel cancer in younger Americans is one of the most rapidly growing cancers of all, because they're eating so badly.
Okay.
A lot of fast foods and a lot of comfort foods, particularly as a response to the American government's extremely destructive lockdown policy. The programs have been disastrous. What they have led to is social isolation, increased consumption of comfort foods, fast foods, junk foods. That's been very bad for everybody's health. And the lockdowns are actually killing more people than they're saving lives.
So, Dr. Paul, we need to, we're working on talking about what people can do to have the optimal body. So whether they're an athlete, we have a lot of athletes that are taking Zinzino supplements besides doing everything you said, Dr. Paul. Of course, they're doing all of those things. Otherwise, they wouldn't be a top athlete.
They damn well should be.
Of course they are, Dr. Paul. But we have a lot of the top different athletes that are promoting Zinzino products because they want to make sure that their body is working optimally. And I know I do the same thing, Dr. Paul. I follow what you said in regards to taking our health protocol and all the other things. I'm making sure everything you've said, I have been following, and I do feel better. I feel better now in my 50s than I probably did in my 30s. But I think it's like going back and talking about, do all the things you said, but also it's important what you're putting into your body. So why people need to have, like our health protocol is going to make sure that you're getting what you need. Balance is making a difference. Getting the right vitamins and minerals and making sure that microbiome is working correctly. Could you explain how that is really making sure that your body's working optimally?
Well, if I focus my remarks on sports people and athletes to begin with, first of all, that herb that I was talking about, and I'm just going to type it into the chat box because I see people are curious to know what it's called. This is its Latin name. Gynastemna pentaphyllum. So anyone who's interested, and the brand that I am familiar with, which is probably the best because it's standardized, is called Active AMP. And I think you can find this at Swanson's and a couple of other places besides. So this is one place where a lot of athletes, they find this interesting because not only does it improve muscular performance, but also if you decide to take a break from sports or from athletes, whatever your thing is, when you start practicing again or playing again, in the first days or weeks, your performance is going to be suboptimal because you're going to have a certain amount of pain and stiffness. The muscles and ligaments just aren't accustomed to this level of exercise. If you take the active amp or the gynastemna pentaphyllum for, let's say, 10 or 14 days before you start training, by the time you do start training, you're already fit. You're already ready. You're match fit. So in other words, it gets you over that very early stages of acclimatization. So for all those people who buy a gym membership at the beginning of the year and go to the gym a couple of times, and then they get so sore and so disenchanted by it that they let the gym memberships lapse. And when gyms sell you memberships for cheap, they're relying on that. They're very cynical about it. They know most people will give it up very quickly because you have all these negative symptoms. If you swallow the active amp for, let's say, 2 weeks before you start that gym membership, by the time you do start, your body is acclimatized and you won't have those problems. So yes, I know a lot of athletes who are using this. But let's talk about what happens during physical exertion itself, because there's a totally different approach to that. Why should we be getting pain and stiffness after muscular exertion anyway? And even trained athletes will if they overexert or use a new muscle group in a new way. You have to think, is this natural? Do we actually have to experience this at all? Well, using active amp is one way around it, but think about this. When wild animals are running around in the Serengeti, every day it's the same old. You've got to run faster than, if you're an antelope, you've got to run faster than the fastest lion. If you're a lion, you've got to run faster than the slowest antelope. And it happens day in, day out. And if the next morning you wake up feeling sore and stiff and your running efficiency has been reduced by 1 or 2%, well, that's it. You're a goner. You're going to be eaten. So wild animals don't have this. And I don't think that our ancestors in the Paleolithic era had this kind of problem either, because they couldn't afford to. That was in an age of food insecurity. You never knew what dangers were around the corner. You had to be able to respond quickly and appropriately to immediate or pending physical danger. And that very often was necessitated a physical response. And then I started to think, well, maybe it was just because they were eating a different diet and they were not chronically inflamed that they were able to do those sorts of things. So I then started using the health protocol myself, which is the protocol that I designed. And I now find that if I start to do a new exercise, which I haven't done before, instead of having, real aches and pains in those muscle groups over the next 24, 48 hours, there's nothing. Next day, there's nothing. So right now, I could get down on the floor and probably do 50, 60 press-ups on my knuckles. And the next morning, I would have no chest pain. So if I go out and I decide I want to run for half a mile or so, I'm getting a bit long in the tooth now. So I'm not going to do, 10 or 20 miles like I used to. I know from experience that the day after that, I won't have pain in my calf muscles or in my thighs. It just doesn't happen anymore. Why do sports people have these types of issues? Why do they need recovery time in the first place? Because if they're living in an OECD nation and eating a Western style diet, their internal environment is pro-inflammatory. And so the very small amount of muscular damage that is created during intense physical exercise becomes amplified. the very small amount of inflammation that you get as a normal part of the post-exercise process is amplified. It becomes far more extreme than it should, which means that the next day, the next couple of days, your performance will be down 1%, maybe 2%. And if you're competing at a high level, that's the difference between a gold and a silver, or a gold and not being on the winning podium at all. So this is a way that top athletes can get a little bit of an edge. And at the highest levels, that little bit of an edge is all you need.
So you say that you're using this, and pro athletes can have that little bit of an edge with the health protocol. But the people on here, Dr. Paul, they don't know what the health protocol is. So could you, in just a short, I know I don't, we've used up some time here, but just briefly explain why you created the health protocol. What is it?
Well, I talked about how the modern lifestyle damages chronic inflammation, dysbiosis, type B malnutrition. The health protocol is the answer to those three issues. So balanced soil stops chronic inflammation, xenobiotic stops dysbiosis, extend stops type B malnutrition. Get those three things right, and a lot of other things start to go right as well. Now, this is not yet addressing the fourth issue of lack of activity and a diet which contains too much sugar. That's a little bit different, and I'll keep that separate for the moment. So that's the basic health protocol. Now, there is something else that a lot of people add to this, and that is another formulation that I designed called Viva, which contains a very special extract of the herb saffron, the spice, which we've known about for 1,000 years. Avicenna, one of the great physicians of the 10th and 11th centuries, writes about this, and he used it to treat conditions we would describe as depression or anxiety. It was rediscovered by some really good scientists in Iran who did some clinical trials. Then other people did clinical trials. I did a clinical trial, and by golly, this extract is fantastically effective at treating depression and anxiety and just making you feel a whole lot better. Now, that's important for the athlete too, because anyone here who's competed at a high level or who deals with top athletes knows it's when you have a cohort of people, all of whom are really trained and physically fit and physically able, what separates the winner from the person who comes in second or third is very often not a physical thing. It's their attitude. It's their confidence, their self-belief. And if this is a person who is feeling a little depressed, a little anxious, they won't perform as well. That'll shave off a fraction of a percent from their performance. And it means that as they come into the final stretch, maybe they're half a length down, maybe just 2 or 3 feet down from the person who's out in front. If you're feeling really confident, you'll say, "The hell with it, I'm going to go for it anyway." And you'll be resilient. You'll be able to deal with the pressure, and you'll come out ahead. If you're not in that zone, you might not do that. So this is one way of this is one way in which winners are separated from losers. That's why there was this vogue for inner tennis. For example, inner fencing, inner water polo. You imagine yourself doing these things. You create that self-belief. But it's hard to create that self-belief if your brain isn't working properly.
Now, you did actually a study, or in conjunction with Ola Ida, in regards to the Lillestrøm years ago here, and where they were using just balance products, getting into balance, and it did something in regards to their recovery and restitution time.
Absolutely.
So would you explain that, what it did?
Well, this was a Norwegian football team in the Premier League, languishing in the lower reaches of the league. And they, like all football teams, had a certain number of players. Every time they were supposed to be out of training or in a competition, there would be someone or maybe two people who were ill, who were absent through injury. Competitive sports, team sports, there's always going to be little problems like that. And if you add up all the days off that these players were having because of accident, injury, infection, it's pretty significant. And each of those times that someone is missing, whether it's a key player or an important support player, that's less time they're having to play or practice together. And it damages the cohesion of the team and the ability of the team to learn each other's ways of playing and to play to each other's strengths. So what we did was we gave this team we put them onto balance oil and 1 or 2 other bits and pieces. And what we found was, in a very short period of time, using the balance test, we could see that their cell membrane profiles, their chemistry was changing. They were becoming less inflamed. They were moving towards anti-inflammatory. Their health improved. They had less infections. They had less days off through injury. They had much more time to practice together as a team, both in competition and during the practice phases of the year. As a result, they became better as a team. They were better able to play together, and the team shot up the league. I think that they jumped up about 6 or 7 places. We've seen the same thing happen in basketball. There's a team in Lithuania called Žalgiris, who are always in the top 1 or 2 or 3 of Europe and who play at an international level. And once we started treating them, their record got a whole lot better. Their win rate took off like anything. And the interesting thing about that team was that they became famous in basketball for having the strongest final quarter. Now, it's played in 4 quarters, that game, I think. I'm not really very sporty myself, but the 4th quarter is when teams are starting to get tired. Performance tends to fall off. With Žalgiris, they were taking this regime. It didn't. In the 4th quarter, they were playing as strong as they did in the first 3 quarters. And typically, because they also had the right attitude, even if they were behind, that's when they would win their matches. And they were winning all of their matches. And then what happened is that, other teams began to think, well, what the hell is going on here? We want that advantage too. And so the word gets out, and other sports people, other teams start to get involved.
And a lot of other sports people did, and a lot of people who are not sports affiliated, but also want to have that same type of optimal performance. I mean, I'm not a top-notch athlete, but I also want to make sure that my body is working optimally. And that's why I think this is actually should be something that everybody should be taking. Would you agree?
If you want to improve our appalling public health, then yes, absolutely. This is something that I would like to see rolled out nationally. I think that at the moment, 50% of all American adults have at least one chronic degenerative disease, and I think it's about a third have 2 or more, which is why North Americans are so drug dependent. I'm not talking about street drugs, but pharmaceutical drugs. And when you look at what people eat, it's not surprising. You're chronically poisoning yourself, or most people are. And that impairs not just physical performance, not just mental performance, but it shortens your health expectancy. That is the number of years you can expect to remain healthy for. And therefore, it shortens your life expectancy. And life expectancy in North America has been falling for the last 4 years. And I know people talk about the deaths of despair. We know more people are overdosing, more people are suiciding. We know all that. But we're also seeing more deaths due to diabetic complications, to neurodegenerative disease, to a whole host of other problems as well. And in those countries where the highest levels of ultra-processed foods are being eaten, we're seeing exactly the same changes. The more of these ultra-processed foods you eat, the more you die. The more you get diabetes, heart disease, cancer, the more you die. So I want people to improve their health status, yes, individually, but I want to improve public health and make it possible for more people to live out their biological potential, which at the moment they're not doing.
That's the key, living out your biological potential. So before we go on, I'm going to just say that if anybody does have a specific question for Dr. Paul regarding this, you can write it in the chat. And if you do write it in the chat, make sure that your video is on, and we will call on those that we can in our time frame here. And you can ask your specific question for Dr. Paul. So make sure your video is on, and be ready to unmute yourself when you're going to be called on.
Well, could I just quickly, should I scroll through some of the questions that people have taken the trouble of typing in?
No, we have people reading through the questions, Dr. Paul.
So you have. Okay.
There was some questions in regards to different things, but you have answered many of them already. So that's why I'm asking specific for people to do so. But Dr. Paul, so just to kind of take 2 minutes to sum up while people are writing their questions here, Zinzino is part of doing something, but also we want people, public health wise, to be eating healthy, doing exercise, taking care of your body, other things. But when you really want to make sure that that little extra that you can do, number one in Zinzino, we want people to take a test. And that test is one of the things you talked about in regards to getting that omega-6-3 balance, and then taking the health protocol. We didn't talk much about that test. Would you just quick explain a little bit about what the test is really giving us a picture of?
Okay, I think that the test is important both for what it is, but also for what it represents. Firstly, it represents a move on from the old school nutrition, which is just take something because I'm telling you to let's see if you need this. Let's look inside first. Let's look under the hood. Is there a problem here? If you already have a good 6-3 balance, that's telling me you probably don't have chronic inflammation, so you don't need what I'm offering, whatever I have to sell. You're doing great. You're doing all the right things. Congratulations. If, on the other hand, you do have a really bad test result, that is telling me, well, there is various metabolic shifts taking place in your body, which are either the cause of the problems that you came to me about, or they're causing slow progressive damage, which will, in the course of time, perhaps in a decade or 15 years, come to the surface as a major clinical problem. And by the time you get there, you realize there's a clinical problem. The doctor realizes there's a clinical problem. You've had the condition growing subclinically for 1, 2, maybe 3 decades. By the time the doctor gets to find out that there is an issue because you've become symptomatic, a lot of damage has already been done. And the opportunity for the doctor to actually do something meaningful is very limited. And in most cases is restricted to simply treating the symptoms. They never, ever get to treat the underlying problem. That's not what pharmaceuticals do.
Super. Okay, well, let's go to our, well, actually, I want to just tie it together. So we take that test, and that way we're showing what it's representing is, getting the cells into your omega-6-3 balance, which is super important. You can see how it is affecting the cells. And then by taking the health protocol, you're going to prove that this is actually working, which is what you want to have to get the nutrients in from the vitamins and minerals, and making sure that getting your gut into balance. All that ties together, doesn't it, Dr. Paul?
Yes, and again, the point of the test is that if we see there's a problem, we can then say, okay, take this, and then a few months later, let's take the test again, and you can see that the needle has shifted. And as the needle has shifted, the improvement in symptoms in that person's quality of life runs in parallel, as we would expect it to. We're actually measuring what is going on in a very meaningful way. And it's not us doing the meaningful measurement. It is a third-party, validated, independent analytical laboratory that works for the WHO and all kinds of people like that. So it's a move away from old school nutrition to evidence-based nutrition. And just as medicine is moving towards evidence-based medicine, or at least it's making noises, making the right noises, nutrition has to move towards evidence-based, fact-based. I'm not interested in magical herbs or magical fish oils. I want to know what's happening, and I want to see that something is changing as a result of that intervention. This is the reason why so many doctors are coming on board and working with us now, because they're used to working with biomarkers of different sorts, and they like to see those numbers, and I understand why they do. And using the tools that we have, we can actually show that you can impact on those numbers. Now, we don't yet have a dysbiosis number. We have developed a technique that will actually do this, but it is still a prototype stage, and we need to automate it fully so that the unit cost can be brought down to a point where it makes commercial sense. But we're not too far away from that. Maybe by the end of this year, maybe Q1 2021, we should have that too. So my view is that everything should be test-based from here on in. And if you don't need a particular intervention, I don't want you to buy it. I don't want to waste your money on it. Only what is that stupid insurance commercial? Only buy what you need. It's something like that.
Okay. Well, Dr. Paul, there's so many questions going on in the chat. So maybe we should read some of them. They have a lot of questions. So one of the questions is it okay to be taking the health protocol in any conditions? Is there any conditions that people have that they shouldn't be taking some of the health protocol?
Not really, no. There is a complication of a sort. If you're taking an anti-K anticoagulant, such as coumarin or warfarin, then the extent does contain something called vitamin K2. And some doctors have thought, well, wrongly, well, we mustn't take K2 because that would neutralize the impact of these blood thinning drugs we're prescribing. Actually, it's not quite as simple as that. By taking a K2 supplement, by establishing a baseline of K in your blood, you actually make those drugs safer. And there's 3 good trials that show that. Unfortunately, most doctors are not very good scientists. They don't keep up with the literature and they don't get to hear about these things. So we have to educate them, which I do repeatedly. Apart from that, really, there are no complications.
So I'm going to ask a couple of the people who are reading in on the questions here. I think I'll start. Mary, would you read one of the questions?
I will. One of the questions on here says, type 1 diabetes is a disease that causes chronic inflammation. What additional things can a type 1 diabetic do to reduce these challenges of the disease?
Well, diabetes, whether it's type 1 or type 2, causes glycative stress, which then feeds through to inflammatory stress. And that's not a good thing to have in the body over long periods of time because it does cause progressive tissue damage, which eventually comes to the surface as a clinical disease, a degenerative disease. So the thing to do for a diabetic, if you're type 1, we can't bring the pancreas back. Basically, you've lost the beta cells in the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas that secrete insulin. And if you come to me very late in the day when those cells have all been destroyed, I can't bring them back. If it's very, very early, what I can do is to put you on a very anti-inflammatory regime, which will stop the immune system from attacking those beta cells. And if you can maintain this anti-inflammatory regime for long enough, what the immune system seems to do is to forget its target. And after a certain point, that child, typically it's a young person, no longer has diabetes. Now, I didn't do this work. I experimented on myself. When I developed an autoimmune disease, I actually had Graves' disease and was diagnosed with all the characteristic signs of Graves. And this is how I treated myself. I now no longer have Graves. So I cured my own autoimmune disease, which of course is absolutely anathema. You can't talk in those terms to an orthodox doctor. They don't expect that an autoimmune disease can be cured. They talk about managing it, which they do with immunosuppressives and various other types of treatment, which are pretty damn toxic. So with someone where the autoimmune disease is at an early stage and the target organ or tissue has not yet been completely destroyed, if you can stop the immune attack so that it forgets its target, then there is a chance that the target, there may be enough of it left to function as normal, which is what happened in my case and what some doctors in Boston have been doing to their newly diagnosed type 1 diabetics. Now, let's suppose it is established type 1 diabetes. Yes, it is inflammatory, just as type 2 is. We can't cure the diabetes, but what we can do is to reduce the risk of late diabetic complications, which are largely driven by glycative and inflammatory stress. So a strong anti-inflammatory regime will reduce the risk of those complications in a type 1 diabetic. And I would think extend both health and life expectancy. If you want to talk about type 2, then we have to talk about lifestyle management.
Okay. Now, Dr. Paul, Linda, I can see that we did get you muted here. Did you have any other questions? That was your question, I know. Linda, did you have anything else that you would like?
Well, I had a question about that xenobiotic. I noticed from the older formulation to the newer one, it added extra resistant starches like green banana flour and that. And I'm very much aware of those kind of flours and the prebiotics that are, I guess I should use, I'm using FODMAP friendly, but are those designed to help with people with those kind of issues? Is this new formulation designed to help with people that have issues with FODMAPs? That's what my question.
No, not specifically. If you have a FODMAP issue, then you probably, almost certainly, in fact, have SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And what you need to do there is these are probably probiotic species. They're right bacteria, but they're in the wrong place. They should be in the large intestine. Somehow they have translocated to the small intestine. And in that environment, if they're exposed to prebiotic fibers, they do their probiotic thing, and it's very uncomfortable. So what we have to do is to flush those good bacteria out of the small bowel, back down into the large bowel, which is where they should be. And to do that, we can use antiadhesins. Now, the one example of this you may be more familiar with is the use of L-mannose to displace urinary tract pathogens. People used to use cranberry extracts, but the sugar L-mannose is actually better at doing this. There are other sugars that you can use to displace these friendly bacteria from the small intestine. And a very traditional remedy in Germany for these types of problems is carrot soup. So you start off with your carrots, and you chop them up, boil them, add seasoning to taste, which it could be anything, it could be orange, or it could be, what else would you add to a carrot soup? Help me out here. Whatever you want to add. Flavor it to taste, and boil the carrots until the carrot soup begins to turn sweet. What is actually happening is that the oligosaccharides in carrot are being broken down into smaller sugars. And what someone found by trial and error, or just by luck, was that if you're eating those types of sugars, they act like L-mannose does in the urinary tract. What the carrot oligosaccharides do is they flush these good bacteria out of the small intestine, back down into the large bowel. And at that point, you no longer have small bowel overgrowth, and now you don't have a problem with any of the FODMAP fibers either. Now you can take the FODMAP fibers and use them to encourage the growth of the right bacteria in the large bowel, which is altogether a good thing.
Fantastic. Okay. So we have our next question here. Trudy Gradel? Let's ask.
Yes, but which question did you mean? Because I've asked several, I think.
Let's do the first one in regards to the sports teams.
Okay. So if when the results are so amazing for the sports club in Norway and other sports clubs, why doesn't more sports club and athletes use this product?
Actually,
like the balance oil?
Quite a few people are doing that now. I mean, Carla, you probably have a list of the people who are using it. I mean, some of them don't want to talk about it. Some of them are happy to do so. Who are the current brand ambassadors, Carla?
Yeah, actually, I will let Trudy ask her next question. And while I am doing that, I will pull up our brand ambassadors and show people that too. So Trudy, why don't you ask your next question and I'll get that ready.
Yes, thank you. It's about the Viva. I'm wondering, I have several customers that are struggling with anxiety and depression and sleep issues, but it doesn't seem like the 28 milligrams of saffron is enough. So I'm just wondering, where should they start? Should they just increase it until they get the effect?
If you look at the clinical trials of saffron, and there's probably about 20 of them now, I mean, a lot. The standard dose is 28 milligrams, so that's the dose that we recommend. I accept, though, that some people do need a higher dose. Some people are so sensitive, they only need one tablet. Mm-hmm. And the way we found this out was once the first production batch had been made up, the people at Faun, who actually made the tablets, started self-experimenting. And there was one boy there who had, I think, chronic insomnia, and he decided to try this because we knew it was good for sleep problems. And he took a single tablet because he was nervous. This was new. He didn't know what it was. And the next day he didn't turn up for work. And people started asking questions, and it turned out he'd slept round the clock on a single tablet. People are differently sensitive. He was particularly sensitive. And then there are other people who seem to need a much larger dose. And I've heard of some folk who will take up to 8 or even 10 tablets at a time, which I think is probably overkill. But fortunately, it doesn't actually kill them. Saffron, I mean, it's a herb, it's a spice. It's the same spice you use to flavor paella, the Spanish rice dish. And it has really very little toxicity at all. So you could probably swallow the contents of an entire pack of Viva if you wanted to. But my feeling is if you're not getting the effects you want at maybe 6 or possibly 8 tablets, you may just be a non-responder. And there are non-responders to anything you can think of. There are some people who can drink balance oil till the cows come home and their 6:3 ratios don't change. Why? We don't understand it. There are some people who don't respond to Viva. On a kind of back of an envelope basis, I would say that maybe 7 or 8 out of 10 people who use Viva respond to it, but there's about 2 out of 10 who don't. And we don't know why. I don't think anybody does.
Okay, thanks a lot. I also experienced the same that you say. I recommended Viva to a guy I know, and he struggled to get to the job the next day. So yeah, I know it's so I know it's a big. But what I've learned is that if people are they don't get enough sleep, actually you can get really tired from Viva from saffron because you don't have enough sleep. So if you have enough sleep, then you won't get that bad effect that you get so tired. And I know myself, I only need 1 Viva and then I'm feeling normal again. So it's a big difference. So thanks a lot.
Well, some people sleep better and some people feel just happy and energized. And for them, Viva makes sleep more difficult. And if you're the kind of person who responds that way, then take Viva in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah, good advice. And I just have one more question. When is the study coming, the study you talked about for the balance oil that will show that it has effect on the blood pressure?
Okay, we were delayed for several reasons. We were delayed first by Lisi because they took too long to supply us with the placebo. Then it took a long time to get through the ethics committee. Then we had to wait for the arrival of a piece of medical technology we used to measure arterial compliance, which is a really important thing to look at. Everything is now in place. We recruited the participants, and I think we're starting this week. It's happening right. It's happening right now. It took too long to start. It's been very frustrating, but in a way, it's actually been a very positive thing because in the interim, what has happened is I've had access to the VITAS database, and as a result of that, I'm now writing up a paper with Ola Eide and maybe 1 or 2 other people who want to join in. Talking about secondary bioavailability. Now, do you read my blog at all?
No, I haven't done lately, no.
Well, firstly, I'm devastated, but secondly, if you go back to the blog site, in the last post, or the last but one, the title was fish oil, upgrade to snake oil. And there, for the first time, I talk about secondary bioavailability and the difference between balance oil and fish oil and fish. So that, and the numbers are there too. There are some actual numbers. And those numbers, which I'm expanding on now, will form the core of a paper, which is purely about secondary bioavailability, which will be published at the same time as the clinical trial results. They're going to be submitted to the same journal. They'll be printed back to back. And the impact of these papers, if they both give the results that I suspect they will, is going to be enormous. We're going to demolish the fish oil industry. We're going to offend a very, very large number of clinical researchers. And we're going eventually to put a large part of the pharmaceutical industry out of business. This will be a destabilizing piece of research if we get it right.
Sounds amazing. Thanks a lot, Dr. Paul. Look forward to.
Oh, and sorry about that, Trudy. It's just muting there, but thank you. And we all look forward to getting that out of there. I heard you say, Trudy. Now, Dr. Paul, it has been great. We're getting short on time here, so I am going to quick share my screen, and you and I can both take a look at who are brand ambassadors here for Zinzino. So the Polish soccer team, and with a lot of their credits here. The sports club Heerenveen, which is from the Netherlands, also a fantastic soccer team here. The Tallinn, their soccer team in Estonia, a lot of the accomplishments that they have been doing. In Lithuania, again, this is the basketball team that Dr. Paul has been explaining about and doing an amazing job. Lithuania here, a swimmer, Edgaras Marakas, exciting about that. Bens Halas from Hungary, he's a discus and hammer thrower. Sarah Hector, this is so exciting. I just love her. I've heard her speak from Sweden, alpine skier. Actually, just to say, she has done so much work. It's still admitting people here. And there it is, just to show that she's been third place world champion, fifth place World Cup combined. There's so many things, had 10th place in the Olympic Games. And I love that she is brand ambassador for Zinzino. In Sweden, also triathlete Ironman Claes Björling and Gunrita Dale Fiesia. And I'm probably slaughtering some of these Scandinavian names from Norway in regards to mountain bike. And also in regards to the volleyball in Finland, the Reka Lehtonen. So Dr. Paul, and there's many more of these also that are all brand ambassadors. I did see here the other day when there was a chess tournament, we had one of the guys with his Zinzino on, and he wants to have that special extra kick too in regards to taking the health protocol that he recommends too. So we have quite a few different brand ambassadors, Dr. Paul, and I'm proud of that.
Well, they tend to be focused at the moment in North Europe, and that's reflective of the fact that that's where Zinzino started. We're getting more people involved in this, sports people and athletes in Southern Europe, and from what I've heard is we're picking some up in the Far East as well, as the company spreads its wings.
Exactly. And, Dr. Paul, I think this has shown that it is the way to get that extra. Make sure that your body is working optimally, and not just for athletes. This is something that I'm proud to be taking for myself. I love to hear that you're taking it also. And many of the people here on this call, whether you're live, whether you're watching this on the Zoom or on the Facebook Live that we're streaming to, or you're watching this as a replay. Dr. Paul, we're very grateful for what you do in Zinzino, and we're grateful for the work that we have, but we're also thankful because in the future, we know that you are working hard to make sure that this is the best that there is out there and making sure that this stays cutting edge. Correct, Dr. Paul?
Well, I'm trying to. And for those who want to know where I think we're going to be going next, again, if you go to my blog, and you'll see the sorts of things that I'm interested in at the moment, and some of those ideas will, in the fullness of time, they'll be developed into formulations as well.
Well, thank you, Dr. Paul. And for those of you, I did type into the chat, drpaulclayton.eu. Otherwise, you can check it out there. His last blog was amazing. And Dr. Paul, I did read it, so.
Did you read the Good Taste post?
I have been going back and reading them because you asked me that one time and I hadn't, so I'm making sure I do. And I recommend it for everybody. It's exciting and actually also entertaining. You do a great job. Thank you for that too. So Dr. Paul, we want to thank you for your time on here. I hope that everybody got out of this how to make sure that your body is working optimally, whether you're a sports top athlete or just regular people like some of the rest of us and want to have the best body we can. So thank you, Dr.